Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wolf Pit with another episode of What Are We Eating? Classic Salisbury steak is a hearty, comforting, and delicious meal that is frankly stupid simple to make, but everyone doesn't have the time, wherewithal, or simply doesn't want to make it. So they head down the freezer aisle in their local grocery store and pick up a frozen Salisbury steak dinner. And no, they're not going to be nearly as good as homemade Salisbury steak. But for some people, it may satisfy their craving for Salisbury steak. So that's what we're going to do today, is try all the frozen Salisbury steak dinners that I could find in my area. Now a couple things before we get started. The first thing is, there'll be one Salisbury steak in this whole video that does not contain TVP. Go ahead and place your guess right now in the comments. Number 2, let's play a drinking game. Every time I say Salisbury steak, take a drink. Starting with the cheapest, Michelina's 8-ounce Salisbury steak dinner with mashed potatoes and gravy that costs $1.18. And we really have to go into this one with an open mind, because what do you expect for $1.18? For that price, can this even be really considered food? Well, out of 181 ratings, it received 3 stars out of 5, so it seems to be a little bit above average. Here's the list of ingredients. And you have your typical 4-meat slurry concoction with beef, water, pork, and TVP. The whole Salisbury steak dinner has 200 calories, 9 grams of total fat, 3.5 grams of saturated fat, no trans fat, 20 milligrams of cholesterol, 970 milligrams of sodium, 22 grams of carbohydrates, 2 grams of fiber, 2 grams of sugars, and 9 grams of protein. That's a whole lot of sodium and not a lot of calories for an 8-ounce meal. Here's our Michelina Salisbury steak with mashed potatoes and gravy dinner right out of the freezer, and now it goes into the microwave to cook according to the instructions on the box. And here is what it is supposed to look like after microwaving according to the instructions on the box. And here's what it actually looks like after microwaving according to the instructions on the box. And yes, we did mess up. We never flipped the patty and we never mixed the mashed potatoes and gravy. So that's on me, the person. Regardless, it doesn't look appetizing and it doesn't look anything like the picture on the box. So we got a big old spoonful of the mashed potatoes first, and to be honest, the mashed potatoes didn't look horrible. Actually, they look pretty decent compared to some watery mashed potatoes and other meals. So into the old pie hole and down the gullet they went. And I, the person, have got to eat a little bit of crow on this one because the potatoes weren't that bad at all. I mean, they certainly weren't homemade, but they were much better than some potatoes and other frozen dinners. And then we tried another scoop of the potatoes with the gravy, which was even better. So far, I'm totally shocked with 2/3 of this meal. So let's try the Salisbury steak next. So we used our sharpest spoon to cut the Salisbury steak, scooped it up, and then in it went. And once again, I was totally shocked. But this time, I was totally shocked at how dry the Salisbury steak was. But I'm gonna blame that on me, the person, because we didn't cook it according to the instructions on the box, and we forgot to flip and stir. So next we got a piece of the Salisbury steak with the mashed potatoes and the gravy for the final bite. And that looks pretty darn delicious, to be honest with you. Even the gravy that was dripping on my feet. Even with the Salisbury steak being pretty dry, the flavor was good, the gravy was good, the mashed potatoes were good, and this meal was really surprising to me. And keep in mind, when I'm saying this meal is good, it's good for a meal that costs $1.18. Had I cooked it correctly, it would have been even better. But with all things considered, I think this meal is pretty decent for what it cost, and that's why I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. Up next, at $1.68, we have the 11.88 ounce Banquet Salisbury steak dinner with mashed potatoes and cinnamon apple dessert. That received 3.2 stars out of 5 out of 862 ratings. Here's the list of ingredients, and this list is so long they should just put a list of what's not in the daggone meal. but at least it does have MSG in it. But again, you have chicken, pork, beef, water, and TVP in the formed meat slurry concocted Salisbury steak. The whole Banquet Salisbury steak dinner has 370 calories, 17 grams of total fat, 5 grams of saturated fat, no trans fat, 40 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,030 milligrams of sodium, 42 grams of carbohydrates, 3 grams of fiber, 17 grams of sugars, and 11 grams of protein. Here's our Banquet Salisbury steak dinner right out of the freezer and right out of the box. And now we're going to microwave according to the instructions on the box. And here's what our Banquet Salisbury steak dinner is supposed to look like when it's done. And here's what it actually looks like when it's done. And for one of the very few times in my life, I'm speechless. I figured it would be a safe bet to try the corn first. And the corn looks pretty good. So into the old pie hole and down the gullet it went. And the corn was okay. It was a little bit dry. It wasn't very sweet. It was okay. So next we tried the cinnamon apples. If you notice at this point, I'm trying to avoid the mess on the other side of the tray. And no matter how bad frozen dinners can be, the cinnamon apples are usually good, which was the case with these. Even though there was more syrup than apples, it was still delicious. Next, I thought about trying the atrocious Salisbury steak, but after poking around at it for a minute, I decided to try the gravy first. And the gravy was surprisingly better than I expected. Not very good, but better than I expected. Next, we tried the mashed potatoes with a little bit of gravy, and the mashed potatoes made up for the bad that was missing in the gravy. They were terrible. They tasted like chalky wallpaper paste. Well, actually, I think wallpaper paste tastes better. Again, don't ask me how I know that, I just know. Next, I avoided the Salisbury steak as long as I could, and now it's time to give it a try. So I closed my eyes, said a quick prayer, and into the old pie hole, and down the gullet it went. And the flavor wasn't too bad, thanks to the gravy. But the texture was terrible. Let's put it this way, I would rather chew on a soggy mattress in a nursing home than eat this Salisbury steak. But for you, the people, I had to try one final bite of everything, and that was enough for me. So I'm giving Banquet's Salisbury steak dinner a 3 out of 10. Next we have the 16.95 ounce Banquet Mega Meals Salisbury steak dinner that costs $3.12. This Mega Meals has 3 patties which are 25% larger. So does that mean it's going to be 3 times as much nastiness as the regular Banquet Salisbury steak dinner? Out of 62 ratings, the Banquet Mega Meals Salisbury steak dinner received 2.8 stars out of 5. Here's the novel-like list of ingredients. And again, we have chicken, pork, beef, water, and TVP, and our formed meat slurry concocted Salisbury steak. The whole Banquet Mega Meals Salisbury steak dinner has 790 calories, 55 grams of total fat, 18 grams of saturated fat, 1 gram of trans fat, 155 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,860 milligrams of sodium, 42 grams of carbohydrates, 6 grams of fiber, 5 grams of sugars, and 32 grams of protein. I'm kinda at a loss for words again. Wow! Now here's our Banquet Mega Meals Salisbury steak dinner right out of the freezer and right out of the box. And now it goes into the microwave to cook according to the instructions on the box. Here's what the finished Salisbury steak is supposed to look like when it's done. And here's what it actually looks like when it's done. And to be honest, it doesn't look too bad. So we dove into the mashed potatoes first, gave them a good mix, got a spoonful, and they look nice and creamy and not runny like the previous Banquet mashed potatoes. I do have to say, they don't give you a whole lot of mashed potatoes compared to Salisbury steak. And the mashed potatoes not only looked good, they tasted good. They had a decent amount of flavor, they were creamy, they were buttery, and they were overall pretty good. So next, we got a spoonful of gravy. And the gravy, although a little bit salty, it didn't have a whole lot of flavor, but it also wasn't too bad at all. So next we tried some of the gravy with the mashed potatoes. Or did we try the mashed potatoes with the gravy? Once it goes in your mouth, I don't really think it makes a difference. So into the old pie hole and down the gullet it went. Decent gravy and pretty good mashed potatoes. What more can you ask for? Besides homemade gravy and homemade lumpy mashed potatoes. Yes, I love lumpy mashed potatoes. If you want to fight about it, meet me outside. So next we try the Banquet Mega Meals Salisbury steak with the gravy. Alright. Even though it's a formed meat slurry concoction, the texture isn't too bad, and the flavor is okay as well. So now for the final bite of mashed potatoes, gravy, and Salisbury steak. So into the old pie hole and down the gullet it went. And it was overall a good bite. And it's hard to believe the difference in the two different Salisbury steak meals made by the same company. And I'm giving Banquet's Mega Meal Salisbury Steak Dinner a 6 out of 10. Coming in next at $3.32 is the 14.5 ounce Boston Market Salisbury Steak Dinner that comes in a savory beef gravy with rotel pasta and a creamy, thick cheese sauce, which received 2.9 stars out of 5 out of 51 ratings. Here's the list of ingredients. And again, we have the 4-meat slurry concoction for the Salisbury steak consisting of beef, pork, water, and of course, textured vegetable protein. The whole Boston Market Salisbury steak dinner has 530 calories, 32 grams of total fat, 12 grams of saturated fat, 1 gram of trans fat, 70 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,450 milligrams of sodium, 38 grams of carbohydrates, 2 grams of fiber, 4 grams of sugars, and 22 grams of protein. Now here's our Boston Market Salisbury steak dinner right out of the freezer, right out of the box, and now it goes into the microwave to cook according to the directions on the box. Now here's what our Boston Market Salisbury steak dinner is supposed to look like when it's done. And here is what it actually looks like when it's done. And although it doesn't look exactly like the picture, it looks pretty darn good, especially this macaroni and cheese. So we gave it a mix, got a big old spoonful, and then into the old pie hole, and down the gullet it went. And the cheesy rotel pasta wasn't nearly as good as it looked. It was a little bit watery, and it was lacking flavor. However, the pasta was cooked good. So next we tried the gravy. And the gravy looked really good. And it was really good. It was nice, thick, rich, and delicious. And it wasn't overly salty. So next we cut off a piece of the Salisbury steak with our sharpest spoon. And then into the old pie hole, and down the gullet it went. And that had to be one of the weirdest things I've ever put in my mouth and chewed on. It tasted like a pencil eraser. Don't ask me how I know, I just know. Even though I didn't want to try any more of the Salisbury steak due to its texture, I had to do the obligatory bite of everything. For you, the people, so you don't have to. And the gravy was the saving grace of the Boston Market Salisbury steak dinner. It provided flavor for everything else that didn't have flavor and helped match the texture of the Salisbury steak. I'm not sure why Boston Market chose to go with the pasta and the cheesy sauce, because Boston Market's mashed potatoes are some of the best frozen mashed potatoes I've had. But now their Salisbury steak is some of the worst I've had, which is why I'm giving Boston Market's Salisbury steak dinner a 3 out of 10. Next, at $3.48, we have the 9.6 ounce Stouffer Salisbury steak, which is a roasted patty made with beef, topped with onions and gravy with macaroni and cheese. What is the deal with the macaroni and cheese in these products? When you have gravy, you need mashed potatoes. Out of 594 ratings, the Stouffer Salisbury steak meal received 4.1 stars out of 5. That's our highest rating so far. We only have 2 more Salisbury steak meals after the Stouffers. How many of you, the people, are playing the drinking game, and how many of you, the people, have passed out already? Here's a list of ingredients, and Stouffers is trying to be a little sneaky here. And yes, they only use beef as the meat, however, they're still using textured soy flour, which is the same thing as TVP. Has any one of you, the people, been able to figure out yet which Salisbury steak does not contain any TVP? The whole Stouffer Salisbury steak dinner has 340 calories, 16 grams of total fat, 8 grams of saturated fat, 1 gram of trans fat, 50 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 26 grams of carbohydrates, 2 grams of fiber, 4 grams of sugars, and 23 grams of protein. Now here's our Stouffer's Salisbury steak dinner right out of the freezer and right out of the box. And now it goes into the microwave to cook according to the instructions on the box. Now here's what our finished Stouffer's Salisbury steak dinner is supposed to look like, and here's what it really looks like. And so far, honestly, it looks to be the best one. So we mixed up the macaroni and cheese, got a big old spoonful, and then you know where it went, into the old pie hole and down the gullet. And I'm not a big macaroni and cheese fan to begin with, but Stouffer's always pulls through and has a decent macaroni and cheese. It's rich and creamy, it has good flavor, and the pasta is cooked good. Speaking of macaroni and cheese, and the fact that I'm not really a big fan of macaroni and cheese, I tried something called macaroni pie the other day. And if I could have done it without breaking something, I would have gotten down on my knee and asked it to marry me. It was that good. If you, the people, want to see me make macaroni pie, let me know in the comments. So then we tried the Salisbury steak with the gravy, and then the gravy by itself, and both were delicious. The gravy is super rich and a little bit salty, but overall really good, and the Salisbury steak was tender. Finally, we had a tender, not rubbery, Salisbury steak and a frozen dinner. And then it was for the obligatory bite of everything: the macaroni and cheese, the gravy, and the Salisbury steak. And it was delicious. And that's why I'm giving Stouffer's Salisbury steak dinner an 8 out of 10. Next, at $3.48, we had the 14-ounce Marie Callender's Salisbury steak dinner with roasted potatoes, home-style gravy, and macaroni and cheese. Out of 491 ratings, the Marie Callender Salisbury steak dinner received 3 stars out of 5. Here's the list of ingredients, and once again, in our 4-meat slurry concoction, we have beef, pork, water, and TVP. What else would you expect in your frozen, highly processed Salisbury steak dinner? The whole Marie Callender Salisbury steak meal has 510 calories, 23 grams of total fat, 9 grams of saturated fat, 1 gram of trans fat, 55 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,340 milligrams of sodium, 53 grams of carbohydrates, 5 grams of fiber, 5 grams of sugars, and 21 grams of protein. Here's our Marie Callender Salisbury steak dinner right out of the freezer and right out of the box. And now it goes into the microwave to cook according to the directions on the box. Here's what it's supposed to look like when it's done, and here's what it really looks like when it's done. So I went in to try the macaroni and cheese first, which did not look very good. The noodles looked mushy, and it didn't look like there was very much of it. So into the old pie hole and down the gullet it went. And believe it or not, the macaroni and cheese was shockingly good. It was better than Stouffer's. Although the Marie Callender's macaroni was a little bit overcooked, it was really tasty. Next, we tried the roasted potatoes as stated on the box. Although they were very good, they were like steamed potatoes versus roasted potatoes. Then we tried the gravy, and there wasn't very much gravy, so we had to scrape it off the top of the Salisbury steak to try it. And it ended up not really being a bad thing that there wasn't a lot of gravy, because the gravy had a really weird flavor to it. Then we tried the Salisbury steak, which also had a weird flavor to it, but the texture was pretty good. I could not pinpoint the flavor, but it was strange. Not a spoiled or rancid flavor, but just a flavor that didn't really belong in Salisbury steak. Or maybe I should say that a different way. Maybe it's a flavor that I've never had in a Salisbury steak. I didn't like it. Even with the final bite of everything, that weird flavor from the gravy and the Salisbury steak overpowered the delicious macaroni and cheese and delicious potatoes. And I'm giving Marie Callender's Salisbury steak dinner a 6 out of 10. Last but not least, we have the $3.74 16-ounce Hungry Man Salisbury steak dinner with mashed potatoes, green beans, and a brownie that received 2.9 stars out of 5 out of 81 ratings. Here's the list of ingredients, which again, our Salisbury steak is a 4-meat slurry concoction made with beef, pork, and TVP. The whole Hungry Man Salisbury steak dinner has 590 calories, 33 grams of total fat, 10 grams of saturated fat, 1 gram of trans fat, 70 milligrams of cholesterol, 1,630 milligrams of sodium, 52 grams of carbohydrates, 6 grams of fiber, 16 grams of sugars, and 21 grams of protein. Now here's our Hungry Man Salisbury steak meal right out of the freezer and right out of the box. And now it goes into the microwave to cook according to the instructions on the box. And here's what the finished Hungry Man Salisbury steak dinner is supposed to look like, and here's what it actually looks like. So we went in to try the mashed potatoes first, and they were nice and thick, but appeared to be a little bit dry. But that's what gravy's for. But we're gonna try them by themselves first. So into the old pie hole, and down the gullet they went. And they were indeed a little bit dry, but they weren't too bad at all. And then we tried the gravy, which gravy looked pretty good, and it tasted good without being overly salty. Then we gave the mashed potatoes a try with the gravy, and the gravy did the trick with the mashed potatoes, They were absolutely delicious with the gravy. Next up were one of my favorite in a frozen meal, green beans. These too looked a little bit dry, but they tasted nice and crisp and fresh. Then for our 4-meat slurry concocted Salisbury steak with the gravy. It had good texture and good flavor, and it had a grilled flavor to it, which I normally didn't associate with Salisbury steak, but it actually tasted really good on this. And then we went for the obligatory bite of everything. The Salisbury steak, the gravy, the mashed potatoes, and the green beans. And it was overall a delicious bite. And then of course was the brownie, which to me always tastes okay, except for it tastes a little plasticky. And this one was no exception. So I'm giving Hungry Man's Salisbury steak dinner an 8 out of 10. Let me know in the comments if anyone was able to figure out which Salisbury steak in this video did not have TVP, and if you've had to sign up for rehab after playing the drinking game. Thank you all very much for watching. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.